Brian, welcome back to the Better Man podcast. Thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah,
good to be back.
You were at, I don't know if I told you this. I think I did, but you were the most watched episode or the most listened to episode from season 1. Yeah, I think the yeah. I don't know what award you get. I'll have to figure that out.
You win nothing, sir.
You win. No, you win yoga mats. You won yoga mats.
Yes, I did, which are heavily used, my friend.
Awesome.
Heavily.
That's great. Yeah. So yeah, I think it was definitely the nasal breathing. I mean, we talked about a lot of stuff, but obviously that's centered on the nasal breathing. And that has become like, I would say that's like 30% of the focus in the Manful Yoga community right now, and has been for the last couple of months, has been nasal breathing, and people asking questions like, how important is it that I breathe through my nose? Like, some people have issues breathing through their nose. So like, what do they do? Or, sometimes people get concerned because they're doing a routine and they're feeling really relaxed and they let out a sigh through their mouth. And they're like, okay, wait, was I supposed to do that? Or was like, anyways, nasal breathing has been huge. And I would, assign a huge amount of responsibility for that to you. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So this episode, last episode, by the way, guys, if you haven't listened to the first episode I did with Brian, you should definitely go check that out. It was actually the first episode of this Better Man podcast. But this episode, I want to go into some of the stuff that we talked about before, but I also want to try and keep this less technical, less scientific, and more easily understandable. And I also want to try and focus this on guys who are, because, I've read about you, and if you've read about Brian, you know that he trains like some of the strongest, most athletic people in the world. And that's not mainly who we're working with in the Manful Yoga community. And probably if you're listening to this podcast, to this podcast, you're not like the ultimate. So are the techniques different or?
Well, just to be clear, that's very few of the people that I actually work with, right? Even though I do work with some of these people, most of the people I work with, you were talking about general population.
Gotcha. Yeah. Does it differ much for?
No.
It doesn't?
No.
That's cool to know.
No, because most people miss the fundamentals. Mm-hmm. So we, including myself, have a propensity to skip over the fundamentals in order to get to a place that we have our mindset set on, or a goal set on, which is largely based on, from the philosophical approach, goals of scarcity.
Gotcha.
Which are not goals of abundance.
Okay. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, the other thing.
So it's a very easy thing to, that all simply means this, is that if you actually take a few steps back and apply the fundamentals, and breathing is the most fundamental thing you could do with any physical movement practice. Quite literally what I do is help people develop a hardline physical practice that encompasses not only lifestyle habits, but work habits and relationship habits. I come from it from a total holistic approach, because if what I'm doing cannot apply broadly to everything, I'm really not that interested in it. And so taking a step back to actually understand that how breathing is actually applicable to a fundamental movement practice such as yoga, which there's a reason why they drove it home, and it's at the foundation of yoga, is because it's giving you an indication of where you're at, whether that be from a movement, mechanical, or a physiological and psychological state. And breathing through the nose just so happens to be the thing you should be doing 90% of the time. But if you actually give out a physiological sigh, you're okay.
Okay. Yeah. Because in my workouts a lot, right, people are, people will say, Dean, I noticed you're breathing through your mouth. I'm like, well, I'm talking as well as trying to do this. So it's a little different for me. You know, but then we've also had some people confused because they're like, should I be doing this when I'm lifting weights? And I was, you know, I think we talked about that briefly at the end of the last podcast. And you said that you should practice doing that between sets. Right.
Yeah. I mean, look, I would say, yes, you should, but you should also be learning what it is you're actually training for. You know, like it's like, I'll just use this kind of as an example. You know, you're doing a 5x5. That's a heavy duty set. If you're doing a traditional 5x5 lifting set, right? That is an 80% plus lift, which is going to require, you know, if we're talking about a squat or a deadlift, right? Like that's a huge complex movement that requires a lot of force production, contraction, etc. Letting your breathing go from nose to mouth to understand that is the goal. You shouldn't just necessarily, and I just did we just did a post on this with a strongman competition because there was a guy who used to be the world record holder who was actually hyperventilating with his mouth prior to the engagement of the event. And while I don't think it was the main cause of everything, I know that it definitely did not help him. And he shut down heavily through that process. So being aware of what it is you're doing is important. And that's what we use the extremes in sport as an example of, versus like, hey, well, what about my basic yoga practice or my lifting? It's just this thing I do. Well, I would actually answer, well, why are you doing it if it's just this thing you do? Why aren't you approaching this like a black belt? Like, why are you thinking this is just, I just work out? And that's what I bring to people. It's like, don't stop doing this if you're not after a black belt. And you know, that goes for yoga. Like if you're getting involved in something like a yoga practice, why aren't you doing this with the concept of developing a black belt? Because I can bet you that if you were, it'd be a lot different than the way you actually are approaching things. And when you do approach things like that, they end up wreaking havoc in a positive way into your life. Meaning, because you're learning something about yourself in the practice itself and what you're doing with energy. And breathing is that thing that is connected to respiration. So respiration is what we do for energy, and breathing is how we actually provide respiration, the input for that.
Got it. So, you know, as I'm listening to this, I think a lot of people who do manful yoga and a lot of people who exercise in general, they do it because they're interested in their overall health and well-being. And it's hard for everyone to get super excited about all of the workouts that they do. So what are some ways that, you know, if people are not, you know, let's say they're just not super psyched about their workouts, what are some ways that they can develop interest, or what are some ways that you can make yourself more excited instead of just, you know, gritting your teeth and saying, I've got to do this because my knees hurt and I need to do this routine and I don't want to be in pain. So what are some things, some aspects of fitness or aspect of a practice that they can, you know, concentrate on to make it more enjoyable?
Yeah. I think first things first is like declutter. Decluttering one's life first a bit. Like if you think you're concerned with health, okay, great. What are some things that impact your health? Right? And that are in your life, and what are things in your life that are impacting your health in a positive and a negative? Start removing the things that are negative. All right. And if you can't do that, then we're getting closer to the root of the actual problem. Right. I don't know what that root is, but I do know that you're involved in it. And when we can get to the focal point, that we can get there, do some research on things. Like, what is it out there that excites you? I know what excites me. Okay. And I actually have to contain my excitement for that, because excitement can actually be a drug that actually means I have to fall off, right? Like, if I'm not doing it, I don't feel good about things, right? But it's also like, what are things that motivate me about what I could be doing how could I go learn about myself from a physical standpoint? Do the martial arts interest me? Does yoga interest me? Does lifting weights interest me? Okay, so, or does cardiovascular work? Does running interest me? Does cycling interest me? Like, there's infinite things you can go look at to develop some sort of a movement practice and develop your workouts. Now, take a fundamental understanding of what it is we actually do understand about practice and having a practice. Something like, let's just say, yoga. Well, we do know that just doing yoga could be enhanced with something like a strength and conditioning program. Okay. Well, so what about some sort of strength and conditioning work? It like gets me a little motivated that I could go learn about. You don't need to think about becoming an expert, but even though I brought up the term black belt, it's like, you should have the mindset of a decade or more, like 10 years or more here. Like, if you have the mindset, I just want to get healthy, I don't think you understand health. Health is actually, it's kind of like somebody who's overweight, right? Or fat, and they want to lose weight, right? That's the wrong goal. It's the wrong thinking. You wouldn't be in this position if you actually cared about yourself in the ways that you fundamentally should care, to understand about the things that you're putting in or not doing in your life that would lead you towards something that would actually mean you wouldn't be putting on excessive body fat in that way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah.
So it's really going after what it is might motivate you and looking at that as, what can I go learn about myself by doing this? And how can I start on the ground floor to start to really understand that process?
Yeah.
And for me, breathing is that fundamental thing that is applied across the boards to any of this, whatever the practice is. That doesn't mean that you're simply nasal breathing the whole time. But it is the vast majority of work you should be doing. And that means you need to probably take a step back from where it is you think you should be, because your thinking is probably what's getting you into in trouble in the first place.
So by what do you mean by getting into trouble? Do you mean overexerting yourself, or
you're stepping outside the lines of where your physiology and where your abilities actually meet?
Okay. Got it. So, so that's really helpful. So developing an interest, finding the stuff that excites you. So, and just because we didn't mention it here, can you just briefly talk about the benefits of nasal breathing? Because, we talked about it in the last one, but it's good to get if you didn't listen to the last one, and then also for me, because people always ask me what are the benefits, and I need to memorize it. So help me out too.
Yeah. So I think the most important aspect to understand here is that the respiratory system was designed with the nose in mind, not the mouth. Okay. The mouth is a secondary option, and here's why. The mouth provides very little, if any, real filtration and defense against the air that we're taking in. Now, it does provide us with a fast and effective way of providing ourselves with offloading carbon dioxide and onloading excessive oxygen when needed. And that is needed when high metabolic output is happening. Okay. And there should be a time and a place for every human being with that. Okay. There is not a human being that doesn't need that. Now, that does not mean they should be running around mouth breathing every workout they're doing. That would be a problem. That being said, and the reason is because you're just not using energy effectively in that sense, from what it is we currently understand. So the nose has a major filtration system set up with inside of it, starting with the hair You have as many hair follicles in your nose as you do on your head. Okay. Each of those hairs is coated in what's in mucus. Okay. That mucus is the first line of defense for your immune system, as it can launch viral and bacterial attacks on the things that actually come in for upwards of 10 years after they've been detected. Okay. You then have a turbinate system, which helps capture air and spin it so that it doesn't just shoot in, right? And there's an importance for that, because if that bacteria, virus, or whatever gets in there, that is actually spinning it and collecting any particles that are necessary to do that. Okay. You then move more into the sinus structures, which humidify the air, which is important for the lungs, as the lungs are defenseless diffusion monsters, right? So the lungs are there as these huge sacs that are incredibly elastic, that the diaphragm has to actually create a reverse vacuum for them to work. And so the cage that surrounds your lungs, your rib cage, moves very little. But when you engage with nasal breathing, you're actually triggering through resistance the diaphragm, your primary breathing muscle, and your intercostals to engage and expand that rib cage in order to open it up correctly. Okay. So that sets up for the most important process in why the respiratory system was designed with the nose. That is for respiration. So respiration is probably why we exist. So through metabolism. And that is a huge, huge rabbit hole that I'm not going to go into, but just consider the fact that cellular respiration and the Krebs cycle itself do far more than just provide us with the energy that we use. It's the building of proteins and nucleotides, which are the basic building blocks of life. And how well you work with that has a big part in how well you actually breathe. And so the modulation of air that you pull in is dependent on the biochemistry that's going on in your bloodstream. And the nose sets that up perfectly. Think of it as like a yin and a yang. In that the carbon dioxide mixture and the oxygen mixture are perfect, so that the oxygen is actually getting to the mitochondria to be used when we nasal breathe. So as I'm talking here, I'm not really efficiently doing things, but I can get away with this because I'm fairly healthy. And it like the flip side of this is that I will revert when I shut up to nasal breathing, which then everything kind of normalizes and moves back towards a very efficient process of using oxygen and ultimately how I'm using glucose and fat for energy.
Okay. So as you were saying that, something that I was thinking about is sinus rinsing. We have allergies. So I live in Austin, which has often been called the allergy capital of the United States. Because it just never ends. So I got cedar. Have you heard of cedar fever?
No.
Cedar fever is this really cool time of year from November through February where everyone just has mild cold symptoms for 3 months. And I didn't notice it was happening for the first few years. And then last year, like, it hit me like a sack of bricks. And I couldn't breathe through my nose. Sinus rinsing didn't help. Flonase didn't help. Like, nothing helped. And so this year I've resolved to do more sinus rinsing, because that seems to be helpful. Do you have knowledge on that? Is sinus rinsing, is that like, does that help?
Yeah, a little. I would say, careful.
Okay.
Because your system, your biology is actually trying to work. Now, Western medicine and Eastern medicines all provide ways back to that. But allergies are really a symptom of stress, right? And so ultimately there was a stressor in the system that inevitably the chain and the immune system became a little dysfunctional. We all have this in some capacities, in some ways, right? Like, but it ultimately comes back to taking steps back in order to combat the problem, right? So doing too many sinus washes is going to clear out that nose, and your mucosal system will stop working the way that it should. Meaning developing the white blood cells and things that are responsible for combating the problems that are actually going on, right? So consider that. I mean, I've observed this with a few people in the process of observing over a few years. But cold exposure and stress appropriately delivered can help with immune system response and how our allergies work. Like I had, my old pit bull, she used to have pretty bad skin allergies, and I hated putting her on the medications, even though it was really the only thing that was helping her. And that was until I discovered cold plunges, and then I started picking up on clients who were like, dude, my allergies aren't that bad this year. This is really strange. And so I started exposing her to the cold, right? And so I would put her in the cold plunge for like 30 seconds to start.
Oh, wow.
And then we got her up to roughly like, a minute, 90 seconds before she really would get pissed. But it was interesting because allergies, the days she did that, were non-existent.
Wow.
And if you look at that, like, look, I'm not solving the problem here. If you think about it, what is allergies? So I'm having an allergic reaction to something. Well, what happens if somebody goes into anaphylactic shock in an extreme case? What do? They give somebody an EpiPen. What's an EpiPen? Adrenaline. What are you doing with somebody when you stick them in a cold plunge? You're getting an adrenaline response. Okay? So learning how to use stress as a means for getting yourself back to things, but also don't take that too far and that, if I just continue to stress myself all day, I'll combat this thing. And it's like, no. You need to actually teach your system to come off of that stressor so that it can rebuild itself. And that's part of our problem. Our big problem is that nobody ever needed any training in being busy. But we certainly all need training, from what I've gathered, especially myself, in how to chill out and take a step back and look at what you really want to be doing versus, I'll just take on another client. Ooh, I'll just take on that project. Right. Ooh, I'll just stack on it. Hey, we'll have a kid. Hey, let's get a puppy. Like,
let's do it all at once.
Let's do it all at once. And it's like, that was basically how we started today. And it was like, I've been there, man. And I watch it with everybody who I work with, and then it's like my goal, without pissing somebody off the first time I meet them, is to get them to understand that they're not actually doing the things they truly want to be doing, because they're not actually looking at what they actually want. They're looking what they think they want. Yeah, because of what they see.
I think let's come back to that, training to chill out. I think that could be the entire title of this podcast episode. But
that's exactly what separates a professional athlete from an amateur or average. Quite literally, is a professional athlete's ability to shut it off and down after they've trained and before they train. Calm like a bomb before they get there, and calm like a bomb and dropping out afterwards.
Okay.
They spend millions of dollars for this stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a good area of opportunity for me. I realized that I thought about this yesterday, but I realized I was taking, I've done this for years and years. This is how I live my life. But I take the intensity with which I approach workouts and training into my home life. So I'm like running around doing all my morning things, like, okay, got to get the smoothie. What's the most efficient way to get that smoothie ready? Now I got to make the coffee. Okay, now I get the dog food ready. Now I got to run over here. And then I get it all done in 15 minutes. I'm like, new PR. Woo! But my home life is like, it's so stressful because I'm just looking at everything like, I can improve that. Oh, that's dirty. Let me go pick that up. It's just like a constant, there's no it's hard to turn it off. So
you are making me have flashbacks right now, Dean. I just don't have, I don't have the kid, but I'm having flashbacks.
Yeah. You know, one day I'll figure it out, or like I'll have this
There's nothing to figure out.
Mental breakdown.
No, well, I mean, yes, but maybe, but like, it's nothing to figure out. It's you just, you know, like you either learn or you don't.
Yeah. We're gonna come back to that in like 30 seconds, but I want to talk about cold exposure because that's something that's like so intriguing, and you know it looks so cool that people are getting in ice baths and staying, and I think I told you this last time, but I found an old freezer on Craigslist from an ice cream seller. It was $100, so I bought that, filled it up with ice, filled it with cold water, and I would just keep the same ice in there for like 2 weeks at a time. And then once it started to get kind of gross and warm, I'd swap it out and do it again. But the way that I did the plunges was I would typically do them after workouts, which I learned is the wrong way to do it because that can, that
yes
will,
and no. Yes and no. Yes
okay.
and no.
So like, what's the best way to, I don't think I would do it again at my house because I got rid of the chest freezer. I don't think I would do it again unless one of those plunge companies sent me one of their units for free because they're like $5,000. Maybe I'll put it on my Christmas list for next year. But if I were to start doing it again, what's the best time of day to do it? And also, how do you know if you're doing too much? Because sometimes I would do like, I wasn't like I was doing that much. I was doing maybe like a minute or 2 minutes, up to 4 minutes. But then I'd have cold symptoms the next day and I'd be tired. I'm like, okay, I think I overdid it because I'm actually sick.
Yeah, that's loaded. It depends on what you want out of it. All too often, it's people going after a time frame versus understanding what it is that the cold, like they might, all these benefits that the cold might be giving them. And the cold is about adaptation and making an adaptation to it. And most people go right by that looking to achieve a time frame. I understand that. You know, I've got a client right now who insists on doing like 4 minutes. And I've told him repeatedly that if he just concentrated on his breathing and giving himself 10 breaths, he'd make that 4 minute mark more impactful by the time he learns to lower his breathing of 10 breaths in 4 minutes than he would otherwise. You know, he's probably doing like 30 or 35 breaths in 44 minutes, which isn't that bad. But the fact of the matter is you're learning to control your autonomic nervous system's response to the cold so that you can actually get the exposure to the cold that you want. And there's a high stress response immediately from getting in, regardless of if you're Wim Hof or you're a newbie. And then being in the cold long enough to just get those adaptations that you want, or those stressors that you want, which they don't last much longer after 90 seconds, but it's perfectly fine to stay in there for 5 minutes if you can actually regulate when you get out of it. The problem is that most people don't know how to do that, which is the point of why I give most people just 10 breaths and then you get out. Is that, you know, you learn really quickly how to get your body to start to respond to the cold. And when I haven't done the cold in months, and I go jump in the cold, I still give myself 10 breaths, and it takes me about 3 minutes, right? When I am fully adapted, I'm closer. I'm up upwards of 7 minutes for 10 breaths.
Wow.
So that's really just slowing things down to like one breath every 30 to 45 seconds. And, you know, it's a very different game when you can do that and keep your system that calm. But the cold's still cold, right? And then I can get out, and I don't need to. Now, I need it to be, I need to be able to put on clothes, whatever, or be in the sunlight, but I can get warm fairly quickly. The most optimal time of the day depends on what it is you're trying to do.
What if it's just general wellness, if that is a goal?
I mean, general wellness, it's like I would be looking at the morning time, but then warming yourself back up prior to actually engaging in anything. And if that requires you to get in a sauna or get in a hot shower or jacuzzi, then do so. But I would get yourself out and allow yourself to regulate without any heat for a few minutes so that you can get your physiology to move a little bit further. A lot of people are pretty hot on this shiver response, which is fine if they want to do that. I am not a proponent of it, even though one of my closest friends is a big promoter of it. Non-shiver thermogenesis is just effective with brown fat burning as shiver, if not more. And what we're trying to get people to do is to learn how to handle the cold and be able to get the body's system to actually regulate easier, so that when you actually go train, you come down off that mountain real quick as soon as the training's over versus staying up high. But if I'm not willing to get off my phone the moment I go, finish training and jump on calls after I'm done working out, there's no amount of fucking cold exposure or any of that stuff that's really going to help you. And this is part of the problem, is everybody's trying to stack in everything, trying to do so many things. And it's like, what's really important here? What do we really want to do? And if we're just starting to apply cold training to things, then, I think the morning time is a very effective place, but pay attention to the end of your day. If you're applying something new and still doing a lot of your other stuff, if you're a little more cooked at the end of the day, okay, maybe do a little less the days you're going to do some cold exposure and slowly introduce it. Maybe not every day, maybe every other day or 3 days a week, and then start to get to a point where, I get to points where I could do it every day and do heat every day and do my training every day. But there's a workup into that and understanding that, right? So it's not just jumping into the deep end.
Yeah. So the main benefit of the cold plunge is what's the main, I guess I'm trying to figure out I think I want to ask you about what are the benefits right after this, but I want to what should you be focusing on? Because it sounds like the important part of that is being able to down regulate afterwards. Is that the most important part, or are there multiple?
In my work, in what I do, I think the most important part of anything that we are actively engaging in a stress response is our ability to respond appropriately to that stress response. That is a very simple way of saying how well you can regulate. And most people do not, I've learned this the hard way. Most people do not regulate real well. They regulate poorly, and this is why we have busy lives. We've learned that if we just stack on as much as we can, we don't have to pay attention to the things that we really care about and doing them real well, right? So I think the cold in and of itself is learning how to respond effectively to it. Like if I get into a cold plunge, if I'm like, okay, maybe the first thing I learned to do with the cold is how to calm down that response. So give yourself 10 breaths, and that's going to come in a very short period of time. Get out, calm down. When you warm up, maybe approach it again because it was very quick. And see if you can go in and be. So it's a very different response. Look, I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening inside of cold plunging and doing cold plunge, right? Cold shock proteins, norepinephrine is a response, dopamine is a response. We're talking about a lot of things that are very high level that people think they care about, But ultimately, if you just cared about your response to stress, you'd bring all that minutia into the conversation without even needing to think about that stuff.
Got it.
Does that make some sense?
Yes. Yeah, that helps.
Okay.
So, and what are the actual benefits of cold plunging? Because, like, I think the biggest question that I hear, the three biggest questions I'd say I would hear, are, does this help me build more muscle? Does this help to increase testosterone? And is this going to help me lose weight?
It could to all. It could to all. It could also retard those things. Because if you're doing too much stress, you'll shunt all of that stuff. So this is the importance of understanding of why I continue to come back to how well do you regulate? Like, can you, I mean, some people can you at any point in your day, if you had the desire to lay down and be asleep within 5 minutes, right? There's a very good regulation technique. Like, this is the ability to kind of bring it down in a high stress situation is being calm. Like, a friend of mine is named, so Dave Wood is down in New Zealand. He runs some workshops called Calm Under Pressure. He uses water training, but he's way into breathing as well. He's a super smart guy. And this is it's calm under pressure. He teaches people how to remain calm under high levels of stress. And he exposes them to water and various things in the water that would really kind of make people panic, because water does that, especially when you're holding your breath longer than you actually want to.
So he throws sharks in.
No, throws weights on people, has them go a distance. That would be tough. Yeah, I mean, but like, look, that's what stress is for. Is what we're using stress. We're hacking things because we're no longer existing in a world that's as unsafe as it used to be. Because we used to have to just to try and be safe. We'd be under constant pressure. And so it was learning to understand how to respond to certain things that aren't that stressful.
Yeah. So it's important to understand that cold exposure can be helpful, but
100%.
It is in and of itself a stressor. And you might already have too much stress going on. So if you just throw this on top of all the other stress you have, then it's not going to help you. It's just going to be more stress that you're not already handling.
Bingo. If I could give the name, I wouldn't give the names. I mean, because we usually do NDAs, but like the amount of execs and people that are in this biohacker space that are doing everything. And I'm like, look, man, you're going to need to make a choice about this, whether you're doing cold exposure and this today. Why? I need to get these benefits. Like, you're not getting those benefits. Just so we're clear. Well, what do you mean? Why? This guy said, this scientist said this. Yeah, that's talking about people who are just doing cold exposure. They're just doing cold exposure in this research experiment. They're not going to work running a company, lifting weights, working out with a trainer, doing some mobility or yoga, and then doing cold exposure and heat exposure.
Got it. So, I mean, to me, that comes back to our next topic, which was training to chill out. A big part of, I guess I'm trying to draw in a correlation between training to chill out, but also deciding on your priorities. Because it sounds like people are just taking on too much. They want to do too much. They want to, like you were saying, take on that extra project, have another puppy, do more work, take on another client. And we're doing too much. And that's a big thing that comes up in a lot of conversations that I have with people. They're like, well, I'm busy from, when I wake up until 9 o'clock at night. I'm like, well, I mean, you can either hire someone to do a lot of stuff for you, or you're just going to have to take some stuff out. You're going to have to lower your expectations and start to take some stuff out. But do you want to talk about training to chill out?
That is essentially why you're training. people don't understand that is that we're engaging in physical practice because our nervous system and our system, our bodies in and of itself work better when we move. So we can't be on up here all the time. And so when we do physically exert ourselves or put ourselves into a more stressful environment, the objective is how we respond to that environment. And so it's a teaching mechanism for how we actually respond to stress in our daily lives, and the things we don't like, which, the thing that I'll do, like I'm doing a talk this weekend in Florida, and, I will present at the end of this talk an experiment for people to try, which I guarantee you, and this has happened 6 times this year, when I say the experiment for the next week is to drive the speed limit or under. And most people are like, no fucking way. Excuse my French. They're like, no way. It's not happening. Yeah. Nope. And it's like, why? You don't want to learn about who you are? Like, and that's what you're going to learn, is where all your energy is going. Like, you're driving in a way that's like, this is what we do. This is what I did. This is what I do. I still catch myself trying to go back to that, is we literally are trying to be somewhere we're not with our driving by driving faster to get to that place, and then taking things personally with other drivers who have no idea who we are when they don't let us do what we're doing, especially when we're riding somebody's ass or somebody who cuts in front of us, right? And it's like, it's this whole prophecy, like this whole thing unfolded in front of me as I went through this process, right? And I've presented it a number of times through a talk that I do, and it's literally the same thing every single time. No way, I don't want to do that. There's just no way. It's too, like, I don't, and it's like, you're gonna find out what you do, why you're so cooked. It's because we actually give away all this energy doing little things throughout our day that we have no idea. We're just trying to be so efficient, because everything about our culture is trying to convince us that we're not doing enough.
Right.
And there is zero truth in that at all. And so we constantly are picking up more and more things to do. And this is has a lot to do with kind of the social media experience, because it's in this kind of endless scroll mode of like information. And we've bought on, we've gotten, it's not bought on, sorry, that's the wrong language. We've been manipulated with this inadvertently by filling ourselves with a lot of information really quickly, and then not being able to absorb all of that information. And so we skip to the next thing because we can't absorb that thing. So we go to the next thing, get a real quick highlight that triggers something in us, whether it's good or it's a negative, positive or negative, and then we go to the next thing, and then we go to the next thing, because we can't absorb everything and think critically enough about it. So we've lost the ability to think really deeply and actually creatively about a lot of the things we're doing. And so we struggle to sit there with the thing that we actually want to be doing. Where in the morning, I am cut off from the world from about 4 a.m. when I like to get up. And that's just my preference. It doesn't happen every day, but I do it without an alarm. And then I'm cut off from the world till about 9 a.m. And I'm involved in physical practice and practice of thinking and doing things creatively that get me going. Then I will do a block of work after that. And then I cut off around 2 or 3 o'clock and give myself a big break. And then I'll go back to something for about 90 minutes, and then I'm done. And I refuse to go back to the way I used to do things, because I was miserable and I didn't understand why I was fried. And this has allowed me to go and take stressors like I've had, like a stressful life and doing things and being like, oh, so why am I training? Well, I go in and I train, and then it's like I bring myself down and calm down and allow my system to relax to where, oh, I'm hungry, man. I'm starving. I can't tell you how many people I know that are like, oh, I'm just not hungry after I train. And it's like, wow. Whew. That is a sympathetic nervous system response.
Yeah, if I don't get to a food source within an hour after a workout, I'm just terrible to be around.
That's great.
My wife is my wife is like, "Don't you want to feed your child?" I'm like, "No, I need to feed myself because nothing is going to get done and nobody will be happy until I get food because I am voraciously hungry at the moment."
Yeah, I'm about the same. And even though I eat prior to actually eating, training too, but yeah. I for years I trained like an idiot. And I mean, look, man, I train. Like I like to train, but I like to expose myself in training as well. So training takes a bit of time with me, and I'm invested in it. And that process, I used to treat poorly. I would fast until I was on the whole fasting game for quite some time. And, you know, that caught me years later. And, you know, it's just like I found out through trial and error and through experimentation that feeding a highly functional nervous system is imperative, and not feeding it can have poor results long term.
Yeah. So for you, I wrote this question down because it sounds like we need to practice being okay with not doing more. And for you, it sounds like the reason you started doing that was because you thought about how it used to be and you compared it to where you are now. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, I really hit walls with things, but here's the thing. I wouldn't have admitted those were walls years prior to that, you know? And then it wasn't getting older. It was just being like, I screwed myself by getting into this breathing thing. And that inevitably set me up to coming back to the beginning of so many things and working my way back into them with the breathing thing showed me how I was actually responding or reacting more, I should say, to the things that I was doing in my life. And that provided me an opportunity to explore who I actually was. And in trying to actually define that, I actually got really confused about things, because the thing is we can't actually, I found out you can't actually define who I am or what I am. We think defining ourselves is it begins with like a name that we get, our height, our weight, you know, and then it moves into a lot of things like, oh, I'm a coach. Oh, I'm this, I'm that. And that has nothing to do with who we are. It really doesn't, because you cannot be what can change. And we're so much more than that. And we don't realize that. Like I was talking about cellular respiration and the Krebs cycle and this crazy thing that is so complex. We're just scratching the surface of what we understand about it, but you're actually doing that trillions of times a second. And you'd never say that this is who I am, but that is more who you are than anything that I would like to define myself as. And in doing that and exploring those edges and breaking that down and really looking at that, it's like I came to terms with the fact that it's like, oh, this is just a process of living and really exploring what I'm capable of. And I don't think I'm ever going to find the end result of that, because it's so infinitely large and vast. If I'm looking, go ahead.
I was going to say, so what were some specific examples from your life in that process?
Yeah, I mean, almost breaking my neck, and literally having to learn to re-walk, relationship issues, growing up or being around family, being around kids and seeing how kids were interacting with my family, just being an uncle. Pay attention to things. My parents, watching them age, and seeing that process and watching a process of people who were once very active becoming less and less active, and the things that come with that, and no judgment, right? It's just really paying attention to things in my own life, with me, and then the people who are in my life and what was happening with them, and then understanding that the root of the problem with the problems that I had was me. There was nobody else to blame. There's nobody else to look at. There's nothing else to look at. No matter, even if I say everything about culture is trying to push me to convince me that I'm not doing enough. Well, I'm the participant if I choose to participate in culture. And when I stopped participating in culture in that manner, I stopped convincing myself that I needed to be busy. And I found out that I am the very definition of what time is, and how I value that shows up to what it is I do. And that should be the reflection of where I'm at in my practice. And that's why I take the time with my practice and what I do in the mornings with myself, because I want that to be a reflection of what it is I do when I show up to a client's house, or I go on, an interview or whatever. I'm bringing that energy.
So a lot of these changes, or a lot of these mindful practices you engage in are, it seems to me like these are your ways of being okay with not doing more, or that's not the right way to say it. It's your way of practicing being okay with not doing more.
Correct.
Okay.
It's about practicing. It's about being engaged in the thing that I'm actually doing. And this is why I brought up the driving thing.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm driving, why aren't I here? And some people be like, well, you are, even if you're speeding and acting like it. No, you're not. You're actually somewhere else. And, it's when you've got to do the time, you got to do the experiment in order to actually understand what that means. And it's going to be different for a lot of people. But I mean, when I saw it clear as day on day 2 of driving the speed limit or under, which I will say, the first time I tried this experiment, I stopped doing it after day 1. Then I came back to it. And then on day 2, I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to be doing the rest of my life. I now understand what it is I've been doing with myself. And I'm putting myself into the incinerator here that's this hamster wheel everybody's involved in, versus actually stepping out of that. And some people do this really well, like really, really well already. But by and large, the vast majority of us do not. And slowing down enough to actually observe that is the point.
Okay. So driving the speed limit is a way of, I guess I'm also thinking that it's a way of just practicing being present, practicing being engaged in what you're doing.
What else is there? There is nothing else. There is absolutely nothing else. And that's the hard thing.
And breathing,
so outside of that. Yeah.
And breathing can help you practice.
Breathing is that entry point.
Yeah.
Breathing at first is really about like, okay, I'm consciously participating in my breathing, so I can't be doing much else or thinking much else, right? The breathing's only goal is to make you aware of your breathing. So that when you're actively doing things and your breathing starts to run around, because it will, you'll be like, oh. Or when I'm lifting weights and all of a sudden, oh, I need to transition to mouth breathing. Okay, is this where I want to go? Yep. Okay, how long? Oh, that was a little too long. Yep. Yeah, it's because you weren't designed to be doing things that long like that.
Yeah, so I know you got a hard stop. I wanted to ask more. I had more questions written out, but I feel like we could just go on for episode 3 next season. But some things we didn't touch on that I think would be awesome to hear more about from you directly. The gears of breathing. Yeah, talked about that. So the gears of breathing. We don't have any time to go into it. I'll just put a teaser in and say gears of breathing would be great to hear about from Brian. And the last thing I was thinking was the relationship between exercise and stress. I remember reading a book once where it talks about how exercise is stressful, but because you are the one who is controlling the stress, it teaches you to be able to be in stress and be okay with it. Is that
it can do that until it doesn't do that.
Okay.
Of which I've seen plenty of.
Got it.
Yeah. People who think they need to be training the same thing. Like here, I need to go run 3 miles today. I need to go run 3 miles today. I need to go run 3 miles today. I run 3 miles every day. That's no longer anything worthwhile for you. You've missed the point.
Yeah. So a big theme of what we talked about today is, yes, this can be helpful if you're not already taking on too much.
Correct. And let your breathing guide you. I mean, it's your entry point to energy, and you only can use certain energy pathways for so long. It's real simple. I mean, the internet's full of this stuff. You can go look at all the anaerobic pathways and, how they work, how much time you have in those, and just know that mouth breathing happens in those. So beyond that is aerobic pathway or pathways. And that involves the nose. And so most of what we should be doing is through that nose. And that can be a guide into how you're training and what you're training.
Got it. All right, Brian, I know you got to go. I don't want to keep you any longer. Guys, if you want to learn more about what Brian does, I don't always talk about this stuff at the end, but Brian, your company is called Shift Adapt. I think you have breathing courses. Can you just briefly talk about that?
We have some things. Yeah, we have the Skill of Stress, which we offer online. We do an Art of Breath, usually once or twice a year at this point. But we have a lot of stuff on how to implement the breathing, the gears specifically, which there's plenty on the membership on Shift for. And we actually have the breath calculator there on how to get started with starting a breath practice and learning how to develop resiliency. And that's the other part of breathing that people just don't realize is that, most people are using it to kind of as a gateway into calm, which is great. But unfortunately, that's not like CO2 sensitivity is a big problem within culture because it's directly connected to mental and physical health. And when we're hypersensitive to CO2, our health deteriorates pretty quickly. It's not the thing, but it's a good thing. But CO2 sensitivity is one of the most trainable things that we have. That's the importance of engaging in nasal breathing, what it is you're doing, but also developing breath practices that are training that resiliency as you go through them. And we've got if you go to shiftadapt.com/breathwork, it's a great starting point right there.
Cool. I got to check that out myself. You do awesome work. So thanks for coming on again. God, I guess we could do a whole season of these episodes, but hopefully this is enough for now. I'll look forward to talking to you again soon. Stay in contact, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this episode of the Better Man podcast. Be sure to check out that first episode from season 1. Brian, thanks again.
Thanks, Dean.
If you like that episode, check out this other one right here. I think you're really going to enjoy it. If you haven't subscribed, click this subscribe button over here, and you can listen to the full episodes on any major podcasting platform. Full details below in the description.